Welcome to the podcast, Total Survey Design. Welcome to Season 2.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Total Survey Design podcast. In this episode, Sunny Up and I were honored to chat with Rob Santos, former director of the U.S. Census Bureau. Rob has a very distinguished career, including serving as president of American Statistical Association and previously held top methods roles at the Urban Institute, the National Opinion Research Center, or NORP, at the University of Chicago, and University of Michigan's Survey Research Center. Rob shares how his upbringing and his early exposure to music and math shaped his path into a career of collecting good data. The conversation explores his commitment to equity in data, the importance of cultural understanding in survey design, and his reflections on the 2020 census. This is our conversation with Rob Santos.
Yeah, so thanks again for agreeing to be on with us. Yeah, so
I'm happy to be of service, my friends.
Nice. Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Rob. Yeah, I've been following your LinkedIn for quite some time. So I've been getting more updates about, how the landscapes are changing at, the, federal and the public level. So I do appreciate all the updates you've been putting forward.
Yeah, I've been really incredibly careful not to be perceived easily as being political. I try to be even-keeled, which is just an extension of what I was trying to do as director of the Census Bureau. So we'll see how that goes.
But still nice to meet you. It's a
nice to meet
pleasure
you.
to have you. And yeah, I hope this is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, let's get started.
Yep. Azrin, do you want to begin?
I was really happy to meet you at the Floyd Cultural Center here at WSU. It was a great honor for me.
Likewise.
And I was thinking about whether or not you might want to share that interesting story that you had talking about your grandma, your abuela.
Yeah,
I think it's something that I think Sunny Up might want to hear, but I thought maybe it might be something you might want to put out there for the podcast world to potentially listen to too. So
yeah, certainly. Well, hello, podcast world. I have, in my later years, after a 45-year career in statistics and surveys and being a manager and director and executive, C-suite type of thing, I've done a lot of reflecting in my later years and realized that things that happened early in my childhood really impacted me and my career later in life. And so I like to share a story that illuminated the value of culture in all that we do, and in values and life experience and things of that sort. And it's a story about a mouse, a pecan branch, and a little boy. And the little boy is me, of course. And what happened is that when I was maybe 5 or so, maybe 4 years old, somewhere around there, before I started school, I was taken care of by my abuelita, my grandmother, during the day while my parents both went off to work. It was a two-worker family. And it so happened that on a fall night in San Antonio, in the barrio, we lived in a little bungalow, and it was, it was quite drafty, as all of these places were back then. So even in the fall, like the wind would go through and it would still get cool and you'd be cold and you'd have to cover yourself up at night. And in fact, I don't know if folks realize this, but back in the day, we all kept warm with natural gas heaters. There were these little metal things with a gas hose coming out from the wall into the thing, and it had these little, like, not cinder blocks, but ceramic tile thingies that would glow because the fire would get them warm and it would radiate heat. And so you might think, oh my God, carbon monoxide poisoning. Well, these homes were so drafty that that was never, ever, ever an issue. In fact, they were sufficiently drafty that it led to the story I'm about to tell. So there was this one night in the fall. It was pretty cool. So I had my covers on. I was fast asleep. It was maybe, 1, 2 in the morning. And unbeknownst to me, we, like many other households out there, had mice. And one of them decided to come and visit me that night. And so what happened is that I was sleeping on my back with my covers up, up to my neck. I was just chilling out. And the mouse crawled up the bedpost, jumped onto the bed, onto the quilt that was covering me, and started running from my feet alongside my leg up towards my head. And it was like a little run, stop, a little pitter patter. And the noise and the feel woke me up. And I was like startled. And I said, oh, well, maybe it was nothing. And then you'd hear, another little scurry and a stop. I said, oh my God, something's on my bed. And pretty soon it came up to chest level. And then it did something that I totally didn't expect. It went up on the side of my chest and ran across my chest down to the other side and then started scurrying back towards the back bedpost on the other side. Well, now that commotion was just way too much for a little kid, right? And so I screamed a mighty scream and, flew out of bed and barreled down to the, end of our little house, throwing off furniture and everything, screaming and waking everybody up. And, starting with my brother who slept in the bed next to me. And, but, everybody else was up and they were really, really annoyed and scared. And they're like, what's going on? And I said, oh, the mouse is attacking me. But, you know, true to mice nature, my dad went in and looked around, couldn't find any trace of any mouse. And it was like, what's wrong with you, kid? Get back to bed. So I suffered through the rest of the night, couldn't sleep. And then, next day, got up, did my thing or whatever. But the problem was that every night after that, I refused to go to bed because I just knew that the same thing was going to happen. Like they would come again at night and attack me. And so this was getting to be a real problem. And so they were like, you just got to go to bed, suck it up, do whatever you need to do. And so one morning, like 3 or 4 days later, I wake up and I walk around to the kitchen and such, and I hear somebody at the door. And it was my abuelita, it was my grandmother. So I run up to her and I look at her. Hi, grandma. And she walked in and she just looked down at me and she didn't say a word. And then she looked up and then walked past me towards the back door and opened it up and went outside. I was like, okay, what's going on here? So I ran over to the window and I peeked through the blinds. And there she was in the backyard with one of those little, we had a few pecan trees, and she was reaching up and she plucked a little branch from the pecan tree that still had some leaves and a pecan on it type of thing. And she just grabbed it, put it at her side, turned around and walked right back into the door, into the kitchen or the back door. And so there she was. She went up to me and looked at me again. And I looked up at her and was like, okay, what? I didn't say anything, but I was just looking up at her. And then in Spanish, because that's all she spoke, she said, get to the bed and lay down. So it was the same bed that I'd been terrorized by. And so I, reluctantly went over, lay down on my back. And then in Spanish, she said, basically, shut up. Don't say a word. Be quiet. close your eyes. And so with my eyes wide shut, I just, lay there. And suddenly I started hearing some whispers, and I was like, okay, what's going on? And it turned out, and then the more I heard, the more I recognized is that there were whispers of a prayer, because she was very religious. And then I felt gently the pecan branches sliding from my, from my shoulders all the way down my legs, on, all the way across my body as she said this prayer. And so that went on for like 3-4 minutes. And then she stopped and she said, okay, get up. You can go now. And so I got up, I didn't know what the heck was going on. I just got up and ran off and started playing and doing what little kids do. And what was interesting is, she left. And what was interesting is that night, I just went to bed. I wasn't scared anymore. I was cured. Uh, and I didn't understand what was going on. And then after that, I just proceeded to go to bed at night and I didn't have any issues. And in fact, to this day, I am no longer afraid of mice nor rats. I mean, it's like, okay, what do you want type of thing. And it turned out that what my grandmother had done is she had administered the asusto blessing. Asusto means fear. So she gave me her version of what she learned in folk medicine to cure when you get startled. It was essentially a PTSD type of treatment. And it worked like a charm. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that here was a woman who grew up in Paras de la Fuente, Coahuila, Mexico, northern Mexico, in a little village, learning folk medicine. She wasn't a curandera or anything. She just learned folk medicine, and part of folk medicine and religion and spirituality are all combined in our culture there. And she was just doing what she knew from her own experience, her own teachings, her own values, her own culture. And she was doing whatever she needed to do in order to help the family. And what was profound is that it wasn't until I was like 60, like 10 years ago, that I finally recognized that, oh my God, she was in a way showing me how to be better at whatever you do. What you need to do is to bring your culture, your values, your life experiences to the table for your career, for your work, for your interactions with people, or family or whatever. And by doing so, you end up with new insights and you gain knowledge and you have creativity and innovation in a way that otherwise could never occur, because those are really unique combinations of culture, value, life experience, and technical knowledge. Her technical knowledge was, folk medicine. My technical knowledge was statistics. And so it came to be that uh, I realized that she was bringing her whole self to the table at everything she did, and I needed and deserved to do that myself. And that actually happened um, in 1995 when I was on a study section for the Agency of Health Quality Research, AHRQ. And I was on a study section. We scientists get together and evaluate grants and such, and we score them, and then the government decides who gets, based on the score, who gets the funding, the millions and millions of dollars of funding, by the way, back then. Now it's defunct, unfortunately. And it so happened that I happened to be the only person of color on this panel. I was the only Mexican American. There were no blacks, Asians, whatever. And there was this one proposal, and this was before the Affordable Care Act. So a lot of people didn't have health insurance. There was this one proposal that tried to address the dilemma that hospitals and ERs were facing, where people, because they didn't have health insurance and they couldn't afford to go to a clinic, they would wait until they got extremely ill, present themselves at an ER, and then the hospital is obliged to respond. And but they know that the patient can't pay, and so they take a financial hit. Um, and this brilliant, absolutely brilliant scientist uh, said, "Hey, for chronic pain, I have an alternative therapy that isn't anywhere near as expensive as the usual therapies of, pain meds and this and that, etc. And so why don't we take people without health insurance and we'll do an experimental design, the highest integrity of a scientific design, and half of them will give the regular treatment and the hospitals take the financial hit. And then the other half will give this alternative therapy too, which happened to be transcendental meditation. And that was the proposal, best science, best literature review, best preliminary studies, best, logic model, conceptual framework, statistical power. There was nothing, everything about it was absolutely brilliant. And everybody loved it except the lone Latino in the room. Because I saw something that I didn't because I brought my whole self to the table. I thought, hey, my grandmother, my abuelita, if she had to present to the, for to the ER with chronic pain, she didn't have health insurance. Would I want her to be like railroaded over to a transcendental meditation, which back then would have only been in English? Because that was an English only push.
Right.
And she only spoke Spanish. I mean, it just would have been disaster after disaster, not to mention totally culturally irrelevant type of thing. And I said, no. So I raised my hand and I said, hey guys, they were about to vote. There any final comments? Hey, I said, I acknowledge everything about the design is absolutely spectacular. However, if we fund this study in the way that it's proposed, we will be contributing to a two-tier health system. They said, what do you mean? Well, if you have health insurance, hey, step over to door number one. We're going to give you the best meds, the best docs, the best therapies, etc. Like, oh, you don't have health insurance? Step over to door number two, and we're going to help you think through your pain. I said, no. I said, if this is really a bona fide good therapy, it should be opened up to everyone. There's plenty of people with health insurance that don't want to take meds. Open it up to everyone and demonstrate. And that way you're giving people a choice in terms of what they can be financially able to afford or what their preferences are, whatever. And interestingly, I was a statistician. I had a master's degree here, Guy, and I was lucky enough to be on the study section, talking to all these brilliant, PhD health experts, researchers, and MD researchers. And I thought that they were just going to laugh at me. But I brought my whole self to the table. I said, here it is. Here's what I think. And they listened. And we rejected the proposal and highly encouraged basically a redesign of the research question that allowed for everyone to benefit from this particular therapy. And that was the first time that I realized that I was using what my grandmother taught me as a little kid to basically bring everything about me, my culture, my values, my life experiences, and my technical training, because that ends up giving one a unique perspective that nobody else possibly can ever have, because no one has your combination of life experience, culture, values, and technical training. So that was the story I wanted to tell about my little mouse. A little long, but hey,
No,
what the
that's a very
heck?
powerful story because personally, me, like when I was a little kid, I grew up with my grandma. So like that it kind of had a hit home for me as well. And I come from a South Korean background. Austin comes from Albanian background, so we somehow bring a new cultural background to this industry and the field of research. So yeah, made me do something like what other aspects of my identity do I bring in? So yeah, I need to do some
And
thinking
then
after this.
don't be
Thank you
afraid to
so
put
much.
it
Yeah.
out there. Just
Yes.
put it out
Yeah.
there, because the more different perspectives you bring to an issue, the more insights and knowledge can be gained.
One of the things that your story made me think about too was when I was beginning to learn about survey methods and design from Don Dillman. One of the things that he really emphasized was this idea of pretesting, but pretesting and like really trying, well, first pretesting a survey yourself and really trying to place yourself in the shoes of somebody taking a survey, and whether or not it sounds like more of a conversation with somebody or if it's this dry like form that you have to fill out. And yeah, so it was really interesting, but he also emphasized, yeah, you do want to get also the feedback from different people, not just survey professionals and not just your target audience. Get a mix of people of reactions in there, because all of their stories or all of their reactions are going to be valid in a way. So yeah, I thought that was like very interesting, and maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it about your application of that story with veering into then survey design. But I mean, do you want to talk just a little bit what pushed you in the direction of being a survey methodologist or working with surveys?
Yeah, certainly. I'd love to do that. Part of it comes from my upbringing. I went to like 12 years of parochial school, even though I confess I'm not religious anymore. But I'm very spiritual, and I retained the values and the teachings that made me value very highly and pursue helping people. So that was one aspect, and I loved mathematics. That was another aspect. So those two things got me ultimately into graduate school, where I was in the Department of Statistics at the University of Michigan, and it was a mathematical statistics graduate school. So I spent all my time doing proofs at very high levels. I learned that there were five different ways of differentiation. In calculus, you learn one way with one type of measure.
Yeah.
And then there are all these other types of measures with their own differentiation. How do you do differentials? Uh, so I was really happily ensconced in that. And then I essentially by accident got pulled into the Institute for Social Research and the Survey
Right.
Research
Okay.
Center in particular.
At Michigan.
And yeah, there was at Michigan, and there was a Latino researcher doing the first ever national survey of people of Mexican descent. We called it the National Chicano Study. And he found out that there was a punky Latino kid in the Department of Statistics. He brought me over, and he very passionately talked to me for an hour. And I was convinced at the end of that meeting that I should go into applied statistics and use my technical training combined with my desire to helping people and helping community to apply my skills and knowledge to developing great surveys. I became a sampling statistician, essentially. And then I went from there to, I was curious about the consequences of my sampling decisions in my designs. And in my first job at the Temple University's Institute for Survey Research, I asked to be a project director to oversee a survey from start to finish, and was promptly given one of their largest national surveys. It's called the National Alcohol Survey for the Alcohol Research Group at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. And I oversaw that and got to do national training of interviewers and going out into the field and looking, doing a little bit of supervising. And I was in charge of the data entry and data processing, and naturally I did the sampling errors and all that other stuff. So I started wanting to be a mathematician, then became a mathematical statistician, then became a sampling statistician, then a survey methodologist and a project director. And all of it wasn't necessarily exactly where I wanted to go when I was a kid because I wanted to be a math professor, but they all combined the values of I love math and I wanted to help people. And then you throw in culture and values and all that, and here I am today.
Actually, I insisted when we're drafting this question before we sent it to you, I insisted that we included this question because for me and both Austin, like we're only familiar with the sociology world, right? How
Mhm.
social scientists become that the career path, the trajectory from a sociology to being a survey methodologist or survey researchers. But I was more curious about how do you become from of being a master's in statistics to survey research because I feel like you get at the same destination, but it feels like a distinct route or distinct path to it. If you maybe you now that you're having seen and you're
Well,
observed
yeah.
like in your career,
Okay. So, yeah.
yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, like do you notice if there's anything a little different compared to how people from a social science background achieve that path and in
Yeah.
your own story? Yeah.
I think it was pretty empowering for me to begin with mathematical statistics and to understand sort of the foundations of what inferences and insights and their limitations all involve. Because that put a different type of lens in how I went about learning. Now, 40 years later, people accuse me of being a demographer and a sociologist and all that stuff. And, I don't particularly care because I think our society is too fragmented when it comes to field of study. So in retrospect now, after a long career, I see the incredible value of what sociology combined with mathematical statistics, combined with social psychology, combined with, public health perspectives and data science and computer science. You put all those together and it's incredibly powerful. And if you confine yourself to just one little sliver, like even survey methodology, you're losing the opportunity to find new methods, new data, new ways of looking at data, new ways of combining and data, new ways of eking, garnering knowledge and insights from that. So what I do is I say, you like sociology, knock yourself out, but don't forget, take some courses in data science, take some courses in math stat, take some courses in computer science, take some courses in psychology and this and that, because it's uh, those different perspectives and lenses that you're taught. When you put them all together in your brain, combined with your own culture, values, life experience, that becomes incredibly powerful. And that's what I found over the course of my career. So I'm able to have great conversations with demographers, with mathematical statisticians about, small area estimation and mean square error and things of that sort, as well as sociologists and anthropologists. I highly, highly value qualitative research. So I'm really into, what can we do with in-depth interviews and grounded theory and all this other stuff. And that's why I look a little askant, like weird about using AI or whatever to analyze qualitative data. I mean, we
Mhm.
need our own processes and our own intellects to throw into there to look at the data. And yeah, maybe AI and things of that sort can help. But really, it's, we have something unique that AI can never provide. Just as AI, I suspect, can provide things that are unique. They can see patterns that none of us can. But I think our uniqueness is far superior.
Can I just build just a little bit off of that? Because I have this question that asks about like what advice you might give to early career survey methodologists. But I'm just wondering, what your take might be on how AI might impact our fields in the future. I think, I mean, I wasn't planning on talking about AI, but
Mhm.
I've actually, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, me and Sanyap, and how maybe people might be over relying on AI to develop surveys or to even critique surveys or to understand, the findings from surveys. Like you were talking about the analysis of, open-ended questions or qualitative research. So, I mean, do you have anything to
Well,
say?
I have
Or
a very distinct perspective, and I've almost intentionally stayed away from doing deep dives into AI because I saw what happened with big data. Remember big data? Oh, that was going to be, it's going to change the world. Uh, there's a hype. Have you ever heard of the hype curve? The hype curve, there's all these expectations, come up and everybody's waiting for big things to happen and then it just drops off. And good things happen, but not at the level of expectation. Now, I suspect that AI might, go further up the hype and realize it before it curves off. But I do believe that it's going to curve off. Um, at the Census Bureau, when I was director of the census, there would be these certifications in data science that included machine learning, AI, those types of things. And they repeatedly would ask me to come and say a few words. Oh, we'll get the director to say a few words, at the ceremony which awards the certifications. And I'd say, fine, but are you sure you want me to do it? Because you may not like what I have to say. They say, yeah, 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 yeah. We need the director's, words. So I'd get on, I'd say, hey, you've just been given the most marvelous hammer. It's shiny, it's beautiful, it's very capable. But just remember, not every problem is a nail. So AI is a tool. Machine learning is a tool, etc. And you need to understand that it's better to look at a problem that you have and say, what type, what is the definition of the research problem? And what tools do I need to best attack that problem and come up with a solution? It may or may not involve AI. I've seen far too many times at least when machine learning was around, that it didn't matter what the friggin' problem was. People wanted to throw in machine learning, like, time out, man. It's just a bunch of regressions, guys. Come on. You're gonna oversaturate your model and this and that. So I said, just be cognizant that it is a tool and treat it as a tool rather than a solution.
yeah,
Um, I said, you just do your critical thinking, bring your own perspective, understand the problem from the way you understand it, and see if you can learn something from that. And then maybe or maybe not, AI or machine learning will help provide some clues as to what the insights or new knowledge you might want to gain out of that. That's how I think we all should see AI. It's incredibly useful. I mean, I've used it, just, instead of doing the usual Google searches, I just start getting, going into chats and such. But I've seen far too many instances where AI literally makes up stuff. And so you cannot allow that to happen. And you need to rely on yourself more than on AI. It's really, really important to do that. I mean, trust yourself. In fact, one of the biggest messages that I give early career staff and at commencements is that I tell everyone who's willing to listen that if they want to be successful, they need to understand that everything they need to be successful is already inside of them. All they have to do is learn how to let it out. And you let it out by bringing your whole self to the table. So that, I think that's the real story here. And AI, it's a tool, guys.
yeah. I mean, when I've used it and I've experimented with it, I've explored. I'm like, I'm actually really curious, like,
Hmm.
what kind of an output it would give me if I say, hey, these are this is my research question, and these are the questions that I want to ask, like, create a survey. And I'm like, you know, it'll start by, let's say developing questions on like the demographic questions in a survey. And I'm like, why'd you start with the demographic questions? There's plenty of research that say, you don't want people to drop out from a survey if you're starting with like, some of the most boring questions, like how old are you or what your gender is and all that. But, it just makes me think about how my takeaway is that a student has maybe a different grasp about like when a professor like emphasizes like what's important about something. And so like, when I was in taking Don class, and now it's been about 4 years since I was in his class, when he was talking about how, well, you don't want to lead with the demographics, you want to lead with your most important questions. Or, on the other hand, like, you have to weigh that with if you're, the key variable that you're trying to measure is like controversial, maybe you want to ease into that. And there are so many things that we need to weigh when thinking about, the order of the questions in a survey, that I think about, when I'm thinking about generative AI, I'm like, all right, so maybe it's taking like all this information and like, through like a probability model, outputting what it thinks it's like is the right solution. But I also notice how, and I'm mentioning Don Dillman again, but he would mention how survey design it's a science, but it's also an art. So you have to like it's not a perfect quantifiable science. So you kind of like have to like weigh everything that you've learned and play with the layout of a survey and a questionnaire to figure out like what works, and how these generative models, they're going to output something that's very generic, and you might be able to like tweak the prompt to get it to be more specific and to be maybe a little bit better. But I also think that relying only on generative AI is going to be problematic to getting good data quality. So I mean, that's just my little mini rant right there.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on that also, but also bringing, just back a few comments earlier. So I agree that like always keeping an open mind, like even if you're a sociologist, talk to a statistician, talk to mathematician, talk to political scientists, and so on and so on. In fact, a lot of my good friends are engineers, and yeah, like I help them uh, debunk myths about sociologists and like vice versa. But so always like being open to new innovations, including artificial intelligence, but also I think keeping a core is very important. So I'm just from a relatively someone who's in an earlier career path. I was more curious, like, how do you keep this? What kind of advice would you offer to someone who is constantly under this pressure? Like, I constantly need to branch out, learn more technologies, learn more about newer innovations, but at the same time have a core, bring a new front, especially let's say, Census Bureau being such a big organization, you should be aware so that you could be interdependent with other units and other staff members, but at the same time, there is some level of division of labor. So like what kind of advice would you give to this balancing of, you know, branching out, but also keeping, having a singular core skill set?
What I would say is that I believe, and I've professed, for the last 10 years, that diverse thinking, which means inclusivity, bringing in diverse perspectives, leads to better data, more innovation, creativity, more reliable data, more accurate data even. And that extends to one's own portfolio of skills and experiences. So I've argued for years, folks, that me being a live music photographer for South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, the festival that goes on for a week, brings in 80,000 people and movie stars and musicians and technology folks and gaming folks and all this, and experiencing that and being with the creative souls that are the photographers, and their vision and how they see things and how they play with light and all the different things. To me, has translated directly into better leadership skills, better research skills in terms of understanding the value of different perspectives and actively seeking to look at something differently than maybe the way others do, using your own culture, values, life experiences. And I think that applies as well to whatever technical disciplines and fields of study that you happen to be in. So sure, knock yourself out in sociology or demography or statistics or whatever, this one field of study, because I do think that we're a little too restrictive to ourselves. You knock yourself out in that, but you need to enrich yourself, and you can be better at that particular sliver if you also open yourself up to other skills and other aspects, be it big data or data science or social psychology or whatever, anthropology or qualitative methods or whatever. So I'd say I'd highly recommend expanding one's horizons with different types of experiences and different ways of thinking. Just as I found, like walking into a room with the camera, scouring the land and saying, okay, I need to do this, and I need to watch out for this light over here, and I got to wait for this person to do this so I can take a better picture, and the settings should be this and that. That type of thinking, that analytic thinking, had direct ties to me walking into a room uh, in trying to be the most engaging census director that ever was, and saying, here's the audience. I got some technical people here that are statisticians. I got some demographers. I got some sociologists over here, etc. How can I tell some stories and put them together so that all of them understand at a common level, and I'm not just speaking to one type of person. That's why I guess for the last 3 years, because it started when I was director, that every talk or speech that I give, I make sure it's made so that everybody understands it, whether they're sort of a PhD statistician or, a high school senior type of thing.
That's, that's, the photography analogy is really, it, it's something that I never thought of so far because we, again, both of us love photography. It's surveys are akin to photography, like it could be very akin to photography because there's so many things moving, like moving parts at the same time. Well, internal to the camera, there's like the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO, like we yada yada, yada. And then the lighting, how crowded it is, how far from you, like how like you know, are your wrists shaky, and are there people like all
And then you want to tell the story. Like
yeah,
you
but
need to capture the emotion of the
exactly.
person as they're doing stuff.
Exactly. That's a very interesting analogy that I haven't gone to think just until just now. And thank you. Yeah.
I also, so I do want to be respectful of your time too. So I'm gonna give you the floor and just say if there's anything else that you would like to say to our audience of survey methods and survey design enthusiasts.
Yeah, I actually have said all that I wanted and needed to say. I am very much a fan of engagement. In fact, I guess I can close by saying that the one thing that I learned in the many years of public policy research that I did was to value the ultimate researcher and interpreter of the data, which is the community, the people that you're trying to help. I have experienced time after time that uh, as a researcher and others who were senior researchers who like they knew everything there is to know about this particular policy issue or this methodology or whatever. If you don't engage the individuals that you're doing research with and get their perspective, understand the problem from how they see it and they experience it, you cannot get the insights that you need to get in order to help develop better solutions. So I highly, highly recommend that level of engagement with your research. You're not doing research on people, you're doing research with people to help them. And they need to be allowed to help themselves by helping you with their perspectives.
No, I love this holistic perspective on survey design. Like, I really appreciate it. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again for agreeing to be a part of this podcast, part of this project, and talk about survey design. It's been a real honor to be able to chat with you. So I just want to say thank you.
No, thank you. It was a great time.
All right.
That was Rob Santos. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. We also want to share our new Substack, totalsurveydesign.substack.com. Our goal is to share an occasional post which might have survey-related news and content, episode releases, and even our own survey to you listeners. Thank you again for tuning in.
Don't forget to subscribe.